Action!
Visual distress signal requirements on commercial fishing vessels. Now, depending on how far offshore the fishing vessel operates will determine the quantity and type of flares they need to have on board. The first line is the 3 nautical mile line. Any commercial fishing vessel operating inside of 3 nautical miles will need to have at least 3 Coast Guard approved of any type. They could even be recreational type. Any Coast Guard approved day or night flares, any combination, as long as you have the ability to have flares at night and signals in the daytime. Typically, these will come in this type of container. So when you open it up, Tiny Coastie, quit fooling around. Here, you can make yourself useful. Please get me that box of visual distress signals over there.
Why is he telling me what to do? I'm the director around here.
So looking at a typical recreational visual distress signal kit, it may look like something like this. It comes in a little round container, maybe a square container. This is what you'll see in there. You'll have a couple of smokes, which are good for daytime. You'll have maybe 3 handheld flares, and typically you'll have these little parachute type flares. Now, all these are legal as long as they're Coast Guard approved and not expired. So that is a requirement for commercial fishing vessels fishing inside 3 nautical miles. Now, when the vessel operates more than 3 miles offshore, the requirements change. You now have to have 3 parachute flares, 6 handheld flares, and 3 smoke flares.
Oh boy. Okay, I'm okay.
Now the smoke flares that are Coast Guard approved typically look like this. They're orange in color. They look very similar to the handheld red flare, but these are a little bit thicker and they're orange in color. Here I have a handheld regular flare and a orange smoke flare that's Coast Guard approved. Now if you look at these, the colors are pretty close, so you got to take a good look at them. Now, in addition to having the 3 smokes, you now need 6 Coast Guard approved handheld flares. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And finally, you'll need to have 3 parachute flares. Now, these here are actually SOLAS approved flares because Coast Guard approved flares are hard to find. So typically when you have a Coast Guard approved visual distress signal kit for a commercial fishing vessel, it'll probably include some SOLAS parachute flares. Now, if your vessel operates more than 50 miles offshore, then the number is still the same: 3 parachute flares, 3 smoke flares, and 6 handheld flares. However, the standard is higher. So, same number, but now in this case, your smoke flares are going to look a little bit different. Now here's a typical smoke flare. And the way you know they're SOLAS right off the bat is because they all come in this can size versus the Coast Guard approved. Notice the difference. And the big difference between SOLAS and Coast Guard approved is that SOLAS flares burn brighter, longer, hotter than Coast Guard approved flares. And the reason being is because you're using them further offshore, so you need to be able to get past the horizon, right? So they need to go up higher, brighter, and of course be seen longer in order to increase their chances of being rescued. So a typical SOLAS handheld flare, you'll notice a difference here between this and the Coast Guard approved, right? And then of course we have our SOLAS approved flares. Now it can get confusing because these flares will often look pretty similar. So how do I know if this is a SOLAS or Coast Guard approved or not? You know, how do I know all this? Well, each flare is required by law to have the Coast Guard approval number stamped on it. And in your job aid, you'll have a breakdown. Any Coast Guard approved visual distress signal, then you have the Coast Guard approved up to 50, and then you have the SOLAS approved. And the numbers for those approvals are actually in your job aid. So if there's ever any question, you can just look up the actual Coast Guard approval number. It'll start with a 160 point something or other, and that will tell you what the grade of the flare is. Another thing is that with SOLAS approved flares, typically they will have this ship's wheel symbol on it. And this wheel tells you that that is SOLAS approved. Now, how do we know if a flare is any good or not? Well, it tells you right on there. Flares are good for 42 months from date of manufacture. Now on this orange handheld flare here, you can't see it on the camera, but it has the U.S. Coast Guard approval here, 160.037. And then it has the date of manufacture right here. And then the key information you're looking for is the expiration date. So when you go aboard, first determine what type of flares they got to have, the number of flares they got to have, and then finally whether they're expired or not. Another thing you need to be aware of is that these flares need to be readily available. They have to be somewhere where the crew can just grab it and use it, or take it with them if they're going to abandon the vessel. Keeping it in the lazarette or underneath a bunk someplace is not a proper place to make sure this thing is readily available. Typically in the pilot house, in the immediate area there somewhere where they can just grab and go and use if necessary. Now you know how to check the visual distress signals on a commercial fishing vessel. If they're operating inside of 3 miles, that means they need to have 3 of any Coast Guard approved day and night flares. If they're operating more than 3 miles offshore, up to 50 miles offshore, they need to have a complete set of Coast Guard approved commercial visual distress signals, which consists of 3 parachute flares, 6 handheld flares, and 3 smoke flares. And if you're operating more than 50 miles offshore, the same number of flares, except they have to be SOLAS approved, and again 3 parachute, 6 handheld, and 3 smoke. And again, make sure that they are not expired and readily available. So there you have it. That is how you inspect visual distress signals on a commercial fishing vessel. If you have any questions, as always, you can always reach out to your local commercial fishing vessel safety examiner, David Kripe from Monterey to Santa Cruz, myself from Half Moon Bay up to Bodega Bay, and Melinda up in Eureka, Crescent City, and Fort Bragg. Thank you.
Huh, nobody gonna tell me what to do. I'll show him.
Tiny Coastie, what are you doing? No!
Ooh!
Just great. There goes the fire alarm. There go the sprinklers. How am I going to explain this? But it's not my fault. It was Tiny Coastie. Does this mean I'm not going to be considered for civilian of the quarter? Yes, Captain. I'm happy I still have a job.